Now, what do you Nigerians make of the decision by President Bola Ahmed Tinubu to recall all the country's ambassadors serving at different diplomatic missions across the world? For those in the know, this presidential directive is conventional practice because those diplomats are holding their post at the behest of the head of state. Now, they are his ambassadors, but the timing of this sweep and recall seems to be raising eyebrows. Is it just about foreign policy or preparation for wholesome compensation for political patronage? Well, joining us now to actually discuss this from our Abuja studio is Professor Abiodun Adeniyi, an Arise analyst, professor of communication, and the Deputy Dean, School of Postgraduate Studies at Bayes University in Abuja. I want to say good morning and thank you for joining us here on the morning show. All right, Prof, let's set the record straight. Looking at this particular issue from the looking glass, as some would say, talk to us. Do you think this has an underlying political tone to the recall, or do you just think it's the right thing to do to recall them home, reshuffle some of the things, and send them back to their various posts?
Well, okay, thanks for having me, and good morning, viewers. I think I would say it's a very complicated thing, and it's not as straightforward as assuming that the president has the prerogative or that the ambassadors are there at his pleasure. It is not necessarily so, because we're talking here about foreign representation, we're talking here about foreign service, which can be very tricky. Remember that the president usually can just announce a list of ambassadors, but oftentimes he does not have control over when they resumed. The present set of ambassadors that when they will resume, I beg your pardon, the present set of ambassadors, were announced, their names were announced, I remember very clearly, July 2020. Many of them didn't go to their duty posts, to their countries of designation until about a year after, because this thing takes processes. And of course, one of them, or a couple of them, even had to go only last year. So some of them, you'll find out that they are just spending about a year or two, far less than the 3 years from when the announcements, their names were initially announced. So what it tells us that the processes can be very complicated, even more complicated than the vetting process of ministerial appointees, as the case could be. Because, of course, the president can nominate. Of course, vetting will be expected from destination countries, which they ordinarily call agrément. And it also varies from countries to countries. Some countries may take up to a year, to do their regular relevant checking, on the person that is supposed to come to their country. Some countries may be simpler, 6 months, but we do know that some countries, especially non-African countries, can be very, very, processual in this business of vetting. And that's why I see some of them, after July 2020, they didn't resume until a year after and all of that. And do not forget that most of the time, before these ambassadors actually resume, we have a situation where the next person to him, maybe the charge the affairs, will be the one taking charge of our country affairs in those countries. And when we have a lesser person than an ambassador taking charge of affairs, what it means is that lesser privilege, lesser regard, will be accorded that person. A regard that would ordinarily have been accorded to an ambassador, a full ambassador, will be denied the charge the affairs, as the case could be. And you cannot blame these host countries because, there are conventions, there are processes that they need to follow, there are rules in which they have to be guided by. So what it's also telling us is that maybe we should be careful going forward in how we recall these ambassadors, because it takes, a painstaking process of vetting. Apart from the presidential announcement of their names, they go through the Senate. Apart from the Senate, the Foreign Office will send their names to the destination countries where vetting will begin. And I'm arguing that, as it is the convention, vetting often takes a long period of time. And you'll find ambassadors that are ordinarily supposed to spend 4 years based on foreign service rule are spending maybe 1 year, maybe 2 years. And again, they are being brought back. And do not forget, when they are brought back or recalled, as it has now turned out to be, another set of ambassadors will be appointed, when they are now appointed, the process will start again. And it goes beyond just a presidential announcement of their names. If a new set of appointments is made now, say in November or December, it might take another 1 year, maybe towards the end of next year before they probably are able to resume, because the process will have to, these new ones will have to go through the same process of getting the required agreement before they can resume in their destination countries. And when this happened, we are probably losing some things in terms of regard, influence, prestige in those countries, because some basic things that are supposed to be given to us in terms of privileges might be denied us, because there are meetings, consultations that host destinations countries may want to hold, and they will think that charge the affairs is somewhat below the rank, of an ambassador, and should not necessarily be invited into such meetings or consultation, as the case could be. Yes, I'm arguing that the president has the power, but in exercising these powers, I'm just saying that care should be brought into the matrix, so that we will not be shooting ourselves in the foot in this business of musical chairs. It's not, diplomatic posting is not the same as local posting, where we can just remove and input and output. This one's is largely out of the control of the president. He can nominate, but nations in the past, countries in the past, have had reasons to reject our nominations. Many of them are in the public sphere. We may not necessarily have to mention them, but it is practical. We have examples, and it's because of these procedural lapses, the absence of proper check, which can take very long time, not just in the local sphere, but in the external space, as the case could be as well. Aaron and Atigari.
All right, then. Thank you so much, Professor Adeniyi, for setting the tone of this conversation. And while, there has been alludence to the fact that it might be politically motivated, some observers have suggested that the timing of this recall might just be related to a broader reevaluation of Nigeria's foreign policy. But in your view, I want to know what aspects of Nigeria's foreign policy should be under consideration and why. And can you furthermore elaborate in the statement that was released, by Adeniyi on behalf of the president? He did say that it was because of we're trying to improve world-class efficiency and quality. And it means in the context of foreign and domestic service delivery, how might these recalled ambassadors contribute to achieving this goal?
Well, the statement by the presidential spokesman is not unexpected. You're supposed to put some spin to the fact of the matter, which is just that the president will have a new sheriff in town, who wants his appointees to be psychologically obliged to him. He wants to take the credit for a new set of appointment. This is natural, this is not unusual, and this is not necessarily putting him down. It's something that every president will want to do. But the argument here is that, sometimes there are some appointments that are very technical, very critical, that should not be affected by political consideration. And one of it is diplomatic posting. And of course, back to your question again on foreign policy ideology. Well, if they're talking about ideology, we'll probably be referring to the New Pope ideology. The ambassadors, they are not in outer space. They live within the global community, so they know what is happening in Nigeria. It's just very simple, a simple distribution of newsletter or a simple invitation home for a comprehensive briefing through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs would have been enough, to get them on board. And of course, being people who are representative of the sovereign, of the president in their countries of residence, they are supposed to be respectful of the president. I do not see them disagreeing with the ideology of the party in power. Doubt will have sufficed rather than an outright recall where you have a new set of people that will begin the long-haul process of vetting, appointments, security check, etc., that you do not necessarily have control over. And we're going to be losing months. And there's also a risk. Some of these countries can be very, very sensitive, really. And do not forget, we are still waiting for the judiciary. Sections of the populace are still waiting for the judiciary. And these foreign countries are also interested. So peradventure, we have a new set of appointments now. There are some countries that will wait for the outcome of wait for the judicial verdict before they probably give agreement. So all these things will be in consideration. That's the argument, really. So if it's about ideological reorientation, renewable ideology of the party, it's fine, but I'm saying that rather than a complete recall, there can be some sharing of notes, meetings here and there to ingrain this new ideology in the minds of the ambassadors who are serving. And of course, what about the overarching foreign policy ideology of the country that you talked about? Not a bad thing. I remember at a time in the Muritala Obasanjo regime, it was Africa being the centerpiece of our foreign policy. And of course, again, during the Obasanjo return again as civilian president, citizen diplomacy came to the fore. Those were the times where we will say our foreign policy was very, very vibrant. And of course, I will include the period of the revered Professor Bolaji Akinyemi, who spent only 2 years as Minister of Information and made a remarkable impact, in policy initiative. I remember very clearly the Concert of Medium Powers, which if it had held then, if it had taken place then, if it was supported then, would have been a major block now, even in the century that we are in now. So those were days where we could say that our foreign policy was very, very vibrant. We're not saying that hope is lost. If President Bola Ahmed Tinubu wants to reinvent, wants to bring about that vibrancy, it's a welcome development. But in bringing it about, we need to be more strategic so that we can save costs, so that we can achieve marriages as quickly as possible, but not frequency, not a high frequency in change of personnel, because that sector can be very delicate, very tricky. It has to do with intangibles, with our brand, how we present and portray ourselves. And of course, it is not for us to judge, but for the nations that we are relating with, the Committee of Nations, to assess us as they want or as the case could be.
All right, Professor Adeniyi, now, do you think it would ever change where we'll come to the point whereby we'll have technocrats who understand foreign policies to help drive this agenda? Because we're all sitting here, and if you look at administration after administration, usually ambassadorial posts are always a way of political, always seen as a vehicle of political compensation of some sorts. And I don't think that might be changing anytime soon. But how do we make the best of it? Because a lot of people would look at Nigeria's foreign policy and criticize it and say that our foreign policies are very weak, and that some of those nations that we try to interface with, relate with, more importantly, African nations, do not respect our sovereignty to several extents, that we are more reactionary than being proactive in steps we take in our foreign policy. Talk to us about how do we begin to shape the narrative? Because you've just spoken about international observers watching to see what the judiciary will do in terms of the tribunal. But if we are to step that aside, looking at it holistically, how can we begin to change the trajectory of our foreign policies?
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. It's a very clear thing. And of course, foreign relations or international affairs scholars will tell you that your global perception, your international policy is a reflection of your local policy. If you have all the indices, all the jigsaw or your local indices, if they are well fitted, it will reflect in how you are perceived outside, or to shape your international policy as well. And what do we mean here? We're just talking about having a robust, growing, vibrant economy, so to say, or all the security questions, all the fears around security are well answered. And of course, there are jobs. People are not jackpying, like we used to say. And of course, our political process, transition process from one set of leaders to the other is highly credible and respectable. There are less controversies. There are less fears of war, rumors of war. There's no insurgency, no banditry, no armed robbery, no kidnapping. If we have less of these fearful, worrisome incidences happening in our climate, where the climate is good, for investment, we are somewhat prosperous, or there's a huge promise of prosperity. Of course, it will rub off on our international perception. It will also give us confidence too, to do things better, but not in the situation where, we are the lower rung, of all indices, as the case presently is. And you can see it affecting us in how we are rated, how the green passport is regarded outside. So it's just something that naturally happened, and of course, you can't compare us necessarily with some other countries where they don't even want to leave that country at all, because they believe that the world begins and ends in their own country. And I have here the average, citizen of the United States, because of the prosperity, one of the strongest, if not the strongest country on planet Earth, until the rise of China. So those things matter, but the charge now is for us to be mindful of how we grow ourselves in these areas. Be mindful of, be much more internal, look inwards. Be much more introspective, and of course, for us as leaders of our leaders, to be much more conscientious about policy initiation, policy implementation, policy evaluation. From then on, we can begin to talk about prosperity, growth, development, and of course, we can expect to be respected in the Committee of Nations. But again, I don't think the average politician really doesn't want diplomatic posting, because the average die-hearted politician does not want to go abroad on ambassadorial posting, because they often want to remain behind and play politics. I will always argue that, politics, if you are not there, you are not remembered. And if you have ambition, or if you want to make some mileage in political calculation or in political permutations, you have to be around. So most of the time, you find people who accept to be ambassadors as largely technocrats, professionals, people who genuinely want service. But not all politicians actually desire diplomatic posting. And of course, again, the African countries, we do not expect them to respect us sometimes if we also do not respect ourselves, because there are cases of how we become too hard on ourselves in terms of judgment, in terms of castigation of our leaders, and in terms of the kind of words, that we use on our leaders and even on ourselves. So if you do not respect yourself, I know there might be reasons for this, but again, there's moderation. There should be moderation in everything we do. If you do not respect yourself, I'm afraid it's going to be very difficult for outsiders to respect us. But overall, I think that the ball is still back in the courts of the government, and maybe the present government in the circumstance. They're just starting afresh. They've got renewed energy, maybe renewed hope, and what they need to do is just to keep the focus. And ordinarily, we know that they have a good understanding of what the problems are, and then find very solid solutions and make sure that the solutions outlined are properly implemented. But in doing that, mistakes or lapses or downsides, like outright recall of all ambassadors, I don't think is going to help us. In the circumstance, what I think they can do, it's not too late for government to change their minds, considering the losses we're going to record in the next months. If our embassies, over 100 embassies, missions across the globe, don't have, substantive principal representative, it's not going to be a disservice to us, but this is what I think government should actually be thinking about.
Definitely. You've made some very valid points.
To measures that are inimical to us. Yeah.
Professor Abiodun Adeniyi, I would have loved to talk to you about ensuring a smooth transition during this time between the diplomats, but we've run out of time. But thank you so much for being on here. Professor of Communication and Deputy Dean of the School of Postgraduate Studies at Bayes University in Abuja, Professor Abiodun Adeniyi. Thank you.